Starship's 13th test flight may just be days away. SpaceX has now set an official launch date and completed final vehicle testing with Booster 20 now back in Giga Bay 1 after its 33 engine static fire. They've also released a new video that gives us a behind-the-scenes look at the lead up to Flight 12, along with never-before-seen footage from testing and the flight itself. Meanwhile, on Florida's Space Coast, teams are racing to finish the newest Starship Launchpad at Space Launch Complex 37 as they prepare for vehicle's arrival, hopefully in the not-too-distant future. From Florida's Space Coast to here in South Texas, we have all of this coming up and more on this week's Starship Update. Well folks, it is launch week yet again, and as you can see, I'm already here in Starbase preparing to cover the next flight for y'all. But before we dive into all the updates from SpaceX, let's take a look at the vehicles assigned for Flight 13 and where they stand right now. The star of the week was Booster 20 as it rolled out to Pad 2 for its engine testing campaign. Even before it left the factory though, hazard notices began popping up all over social media, pointing towards a possible launch this week, which caught many of us off guard. So all eyes were on the booster to see just how ready it really was. Normally on previous flights, the booster performs its static fire well ahead of launch, so it's rarely in flight configuration. But Booster 20 seems to be the exception here. When it rolled out though, its shines were already closed out, the engine section was already painted, and it had almost no external instrumentation attached. It looked almost flight ready right from the start. We also noticed that several engines on Booster 20 were previously used on Booster 19 during its 10 engine test, and others during its first full 33 engine static fire test. Well, the aborted one. As you might remember, SpaceX had to replace and repair multiple engines after hard shutdowns and aborts during those tests. But it looks like those engines were repaired and cleared for use again, this time on Booster 20, which makes sense when you think about it, since Booster 19 had actually borrowed engines from the batch originally assigned for Booster 20. So, with the booster on the pad, SpaceX loaded propellant, and then Booster 20 had delivered a record-breaking static fire, running for more than 20 seconds on the very first attempt, less than a day after rolling out to the pad. No spin primes, no igniter tests, just straight into a 33 engine static fire right from the get-go. And it looked great. Combined with the fact of how complete the booster looked when it rolled out, the launch date set this week suddenly seemed not just possible, but probable. SpaceX also dropped some killer drone footage from the test. There's a beautiful slow motion shot from above that displays just how insanely powerful Super Heavy really is. And importantly, Pad 2 is capable of allowing the booster to fire at full thrust, unlike Pad 1, where they had to throttle down to avoid damaging the hold down clamps. You can also see the booster throttling down near the end of the burn, just like we saw with Booster 19. Now, even though Booster 20 showed up almost flight ready, there is still some work left. For example, we don't yet know if the flight termination system was already installed, or if they'll need to remove any other instrumentation on the pad. So it wasn't really a surprise to see the booster leaving the mount and heading back to the production site not long after. But not before a chopstick mishap, but more on that later. So with Booster 20 now back in Giga Bay 1, where's Ship 40? Well, we haven't seen much of it since it rolled back from its own static fire test at Massey's. It should currently be on the front left work stand inside of Giga Bay 2, receiving final checkouts before heading back to the pad soon for flight. As we hinted at earlier, Flight 13 is currently targeting a net or no earlier than date of Thursday, July 16th, with a 90-minute launch window opening at 5:45 p.m. Central Time. So what's Flight 13 all about exactly? Well, it's largely a repeat of Flight 12, further demonstrating the capabilities of the version 3 vehicles. A lot went well last time, but there are still a few things that need some refinement and attention. One of the biggest being hot staging. During Flight 12, the booster flipped the wrong way by about 90 degrees. SpaceX says this was caused by slight differences in the ship's engine startup timing. For Flight 13, they are introducing a brand new and more robust startup sequence that should make the booster flip much more consistently as desired. This wasn't a huge surprise. The off-nominal flip was pretty obvious, and SpaceX's own static fire video of Ship 40 already showed a much different engine startup order than we observed on Flight 12. Back then, the plan had been to light all 3 RVACs first, followed by sea-level engine 1, and then the remaining 2 engines. But now though, it looks like they're lighting 1 sea-level engine plus only 2 RVACs, both in the same area of the vehicle. This should create the required thrust imbalance to flip the booster in the right direction. Then, as the ship separates, the remaining 2 sea-level engines and the final RVAC will ignite. It sounds like a bit more work for the ship's GNC to account for, but nothing they can't handle. shortly. However, hot staging wasn't the only issue on Flight 12. The boost back burn also failed very early on. According to SpaceX, 5 of the 33 engines had problems relighting, which cut the burn short. Remember those flashes we saw during boost back? Those were Raptors failing to start. Now, SpaceX hasn't actually said if the problem was vehicle-related or just bad luck with those engines in particular, but they did say they've made vehicle-side hardware upgrades to improve relight reliability and updated the engine alarms and abort criteria to better handle the realities of a multi-engine flight environment. Over on the ship side, things hadn't gone perfectly on Flight 12 either. The ship lost an RVAC during ascent pretty early on and later had to abort its plane relight test of one of its sea-level engines subsequently. SpaceX says they've made necessary modifications for this flight, also mentioning additional reliability improvements coming to future versions of Raptor. The biggest changes on Flight 13 will be on the ship side. Last time, Ship 39 carried 20 simulators and 2 modified Starlink V3 mini satellites fitted with cameras and antennas to image the heat shield and send data back to the ground. This time though, SpaceX is carrying 20 real Starlink version 3 satellites for the first time. These will test solar panel deployment, ground communications, and laser links with the existing Starlink constellation. All of these satellites will follow the exact same suborbital trajectory as Ship and burn up on re-entry. Their lives will be short, but the data they collect should be very valuable for validating Starlink version 3 technology, which, mind you, can only fly on Starship. 6 of those 20 version 3 satellites are also carrying cameras to repeat the same thermal protection system scan from Flight 12. SpaceX continues to refine the heat shield and closely assess its performance after each flight. For this mission, the ship will once again carry painted tiles to simulate missing ones for imaging purposes. It's also flying several heat shield experiments, including tiles attached to the leeward side of the main body and the flaps, something we have seen on previous flights plenty before. The aft skirt will also feature modified tiles and attachment methods to gather data on different designs. They're also flying load sensing tiles to measure dynamic pressures on ascent. This suggests Starship will not throttle down during the point of max Q as it did last time. You know, it wasn't that long ago that Elon had mentioned skipping the throttle down at max Q entirely to boost performance. So it's no surprise here to see that SpaceX is pushing through even harder. Interestingly though, even with the higher dynamic pressures involved, the max Q timing doesn't appear any different than on Flight 12. It might actually happen later in the flight once all said and done though. Whether that's more accurate timing this go around or just another discrepancy in published data, we'll find out soon enough. I think that serves as a nice segue into what we can expect for the launch timeline. The propellant loading sequence on Flight 13 is not that much different from Flight 12, but there are some small differences. For Flight 13, propellant loading will begin a little bit later than compared to Flight 12, though the sequence itself remains more or less the same. Booster and ship will receive liquid oxygen first at around the T-37 minute marker, followed by liquid methane around T-35 minutes. From start to finish, prop load for Starship is nearly as short as Falcon 9 now. And considering there's 5,000 tons of propellant to load in that time, that just shows you the level of hardware at play here. But it's no surprise that SpaceX is still tweaking these timelines as they optimize operations with their current tank farm and rollout upgrades. The rest of the countdown should look very similar to Flight 12. Just like last time, the engines will light simultaneously and reach full power before the rocket commits to flight. The hold down clamps will then release, and Starship will head southeast over the Gulf. Hopefully we'll get just as many, if not more, epic liftoff shots as last time. And if you'd like any of our prints, head over to shop.nasasspaceflight.com. New launches always bring fresh imagery, so some of our older options may be replaced soon. So now is your time to get those if you've been eyeing one or two. And there are some good ones in there, I do have to say. Like some very good shots that many of us are proud of. Once the rocket clears max Q, it's time for hot staging. MECO on this flight is planned about 4 seconds earlier than last time. After hot staging, the booster will then flip, hopefully in the right direction this time, and relight all 33 engines right away for its boost back burn, which still breaks my brain a bit to light all of your engines for boost back compared to 13 as before. Because that's just an insane amount of power going the other direction, but alas. Also interestingly, the boost back burn is much shorter this time around, only 38 seconds in duration compared to a full minute targeted on Flight 12. It's closer to what we've seen on some earlier flights, but it's not yet clear exactly why the duration has changed. The landing burn is roughly the same length, just 1 second longer than the planned time last time, and should occur about 6.5 minutes after liftoff if all goes well. On the ship side, the ascent burn is planned to end at 8 minutes and 5 seconds, 6 seconds earlier than Flight 12's initial target before the engine out. The rest of the timeline though, between satellite deployment, Raptor relight, re-entry, and landing burn stays within about 60 seconds of the previous flight. So here's hoping we see the in-space Raptor relight and the full landing burn profile, with all 3 engines stepping down from 2, finally down to 1 at the end. And of course, a good satellite deployment, because that would be epic. But for a flight to actually happen though, it's not just the vehicles that had to be ready. The Launchpad has to cooperate too, and sometimes they like to cause some problems before liftoff. It's like comedically timed every time. While Booster 20 was still on the mount, SpaceX ran tests of the compression loads between the landing rails and the grid fins. They also practiced closing the chopsticks at catch speed, just like they would during a real-life catch. Our Starbase live mics actually picked up the sounds made from the sticks during this rapid movement, and it's actually pretty wicked. Check this out. Shortly after testing though, crews were swarming the chopsticks and focusing on one area of the actuators. Sure enough, they had broken one. The team worked all day and replaced the actuator within 24 hours. Thanks to their quick work, the delay to roll Booster 20 back to Giga Bay 1 was only about 1 day. Now what makes this especially funny is that it happened right after SpaceX released their next video in their Starship docuseries. They were talking about how the week leading up to launch is always full of surprises. And sure enough, there they were, less than a week from launch, dealing with another pad issue. And speaking of, in other news, SpaceX has released their second Starship docuseries episode, this one titled Critical Path. The video itself is about 34 minutes long, so don't worry, we're not going to cover it frame by frame and break it down. But it does give some fantastic new insights into the work leading up to launch, along with a lot of never-seen footage from Flight 12 and previous testing. It went into a lot more detail about what happened during Booster 19's first 2 static fire tests. During the 10-engine test, the abort was triggered by the full weight of the rocket on the pad. SpaceX's Director of Launch Engineering, Tim Southerton, explained that they simply hadn't been able to test these exact conditions before in terms of weight and force with this hardware, which makes sense because there is no real substitute for Starship. I mean, just look at the scale of the flame diverter next to him. Like, that's freaking huge. On the first full 33-engine static fire attempt, the early abort was caused by extreme vibrations that set off sensors in the flame diverter, thus triggering an abort and kicking them out of the test early. SpaceX had to rework their simulations so they could monitor the diverter's health without triggering unnecessary aborts going forward. They also highlighted how much better this new flame diverter is compared to the pretty janky Pad 1 design. That said though, Pad 1 let them move fast and cheap while they learned to build a proper launch pad. The video also showed different material test plates welded to the actual walls of the flame trench to measure heat and see how well the deluge was actually performing. Though the most humorous was the mentioning of Sharpie marks still on the flame trench walls. So they're sub-Sharpie, so they say. Closer to launch, they ran into more pad issues. One of the skates on the chopstick carriage system broke. They had to fly in a replacement all the way from the Cape and reinstalled it in record time. I guess perks of having multiple launch pads and so much hardware around, you can do that. The footage of the crews working on the carriage system really drives home how massive the hardware in question here is. And lots of WD-40. The video also gave us a brand new look at the recovery efforts in the Indian Ocean. SpaceX sends teams out there every flight to recover data on the ship's condition after re-entry. And we got some great new views of the buoys in previous splashdowns. We also finally saw the loading of Ship 39's PEZ dispenser system. Former colleague Thomas Burkhart explained the process and what they were testing with the 2 modified Starlink satellites, nicknamed Dodger Dogs. He confirmed that it was also the heaviest payload SpaceX has ever launched, about 37.5 metric tons in total, with each satellite weighing about 1.7 metric tons. Previously, satellites were loaded mostly by hand with lifts. This new speed loader, that big white box that we've seen around Starbase, makes the whole process much faster. Later in the video, SpaceX explained the issue they had with the first launch attempt with the Ship Quick Disconnect, or SQD arm. The arm is designed to press against the ship and create a tight seal. That push also creates an opposing force on the tower. The pin that holds the arm in place is released in the final 40 seconds of the countdown so it can swing away at liftoff. On this launch attempt though, the attempted release put too much force on the tower hydraulics and triggered an abort, despite multiple attempts to free the pin. Crews went back up and fixed it by welding a hard stop bumper onto the arm to limit how much it could push. We also got some fantastic new flight footage. There are great mission control shots that show the human side of the operation, plus an awesome view of liftoff from the Ship Quick Disconnect arm itself as it retracted. We saw the boost back burn from a new wide-angle camera mounted on the middle engine section of the booster perfect for checking engine health in flight. There were also some seriously impressive re-entry shots from the booster, including the shockwave as it plowed through the atmosphere at supersonic speeds. Yeah, I forgot about that. It basically crashed into the ocean at supersonic speeds. Interestingly though, we didn't get any new views from the Dodger Dog satellites beyond what we saw during the broadcast. Maybe the footage either wasn't optimal or they're saving it for later. But we did get new angles of the ship's flip and landing burn from the buoys and drones, including thermal footage. And yes, check out the COPV just torpedoing the buoy here. I wouldn't want to be anywhere near that. Surprisingly, even after the explosion, large pieces of the ship stayed afloat for a while, but mostly the aft section. It's kind of tough to watch sometimes watching hardware like this just blow up, but these ships are giving it their all to collect critical data for the next versions and the next missions. And speaking of future vehicles, let's go ahead and take a quick look at what's coming once Flight 13 is said and done. We expect SpaceX will use Booster 21 for Flight 14. It's already been fully stacked for over 2 weeks now, so we should see it roll out soon in Giga Bay 1 for cryo-proof testing at Massey's. Even if it follows the same timeline as Booster 20, that would still put Flight 14 at about mid-September. But if they manage to move a little bit faster, like we know SpaceX can, we might see Flight 14 happening as early as next month. We will definitely be keeping a close eye on hardware for that. Booster 22 is also making solid progress. Just this past week, teams welded another barrel section for its liquid oxygen tank, bringing it to 5 barrels tall. If this pace holds, it might already have its 6 barrel section by the time you're watching this. We had actually seen some of this progress after Booster 20 had rolled to Pad 2 and the door for Giga Bay 1 was still open. Next comes the fuel transfer tube, the landing tanks, the engine section, and then the methane tank welding. Before long, Booster 22 should be fully stacked and heading out for cryo-proof testing as well. On the ship side, you might remember from last week that Ship 41 completed its cryogenic testing and rolled back to Giga Bay 2. Since then, it's been sitting in the left rear workstation, most likely waiting for engine installation ahead of its static fire campaign. Now, we could compare Ship 41's timeline to Ship 40, but that might not be the best gauge. The last couple of flights have shown a pattern. On Flight 12, the ship was ready first and had to wait on the booster. For Flight 13, Ship 40 seems to have also waited after Flight 12 before getting its engine installed and heading out for static fire testing. That's why Ship 39 only took 34 days between cryo testing and static fire testing, while Ship 40 took 48 days, a full 2 weeks longer. Given that trend, Ship 41 can move from cryo testing to static fire testing in a month or less, putting it on track for possible flight readiness in August. Meanwhile, Ship 42 is making steady progress. It received its common dome section this week, with just 3 more barrel sections left before it's fully stacked. It's moving at a solid pace. Inside Star Factory's nose cone hall, we can also see what's coming with future vehicles down the line. This week, a new nose cone with nearly full heat shield tile coverage appeared, and it already received its forward aerodynamic flaps. This is almost certainly Ship 43, the successor to Ship 42. A few notable things though. This may be the first flight nose cone to be fully tiled using SpaceX's new tile installation station. We've seen what we believe to be test nose cones go through this station as pathfinders, and now they're testing the real thing. It also looks like they're using that brand new purple adhesive material on this vehicle, the same as we saw on the test tiles on Ship 39's leeward side. Deeper in the hull, another nose cone is being prepped to receive the COPVs that go around the header tank assembly. Now, all of these ships are going to need engines at some point, which means it's time for our McGregor Minute. This week saw 13 Raptor tests in total, with 8 of them on the older Raptor vertical stand. Most were around the 105-second mark. What we believe are the standard acceptance tests for flight engines. The most exciting test, though, came off the Raptor North stand, a record-breaking 480-second burn, or exactly 8 minutes. That is the longest burn ever witnessed at this stand, beating the previous record of 420 seconds from late May. It's also the second longest Raptor test we've ever seen at McGregor since we started filming back in April of 2022. The only one surpassing it was a nearly 900-second or 15-minute test on the old tripod stand with a Raptor 2 engine. Rest in peace, tripod. It is great to see Raptor 3 now getting these long-duration burns too. Maybe we'll eventually see that 15-minute test, or longer, to really push Raptor 3 to its ultimate limits. Fingers crossed, because that would be epic to see. We also hit another milestone this week, the highest serial number Raptor 3 spotted so far. Raptor SN201 rolled past our cameras on Saturday. It's wild to think that we're already in the freaking 200s, but that's a really good sign that SpaceX has plenty of these engines in the pipeline for future missions. SpaceX is also hard at work preparing their launch pads and facilities to support a much higher launch cadence. Pad 1 in particular is being upgraded to match the newer flame diverter design that we see on Pad 2. The tower is receiving upgrades too, which included removing the end portion of the old ship quick disconnect arm this week. Now, it's still unclear whether SpaceX will refurbish and upgrade the existing arm or remove it entirely. But they've done the refurb route before, for example, with the LC-39A arm, and it worked out pretty well from what we can tell. That being said though, we have spotted some brand new QD arm hardware arriving by truck, so there is a good chance they'll build a brand new one. It is still so strange to see Pad 1 out of commission because that pad has supported the first 11 flights going all the way back to Flight 1 in April of 2023. And then now it's just sitting there. SpaceX is also making great progress with the construction of the Giga Bay here at Starbase. More cladding has been installed and additional beams and columns are now in place for the final level. This top section will form the penthouse portion of the facility and will likely include offices with a direct view down onto the vehicle production facility right below them. But that being said though, Florida's Giga Bay is much farther along. Not only is its penthouse level structure complete way ahead of its counterpart, but it's also just gained a brand new bridge crane. This week, SpaceX's Kiko Donchev posted a photo on X showing the 420-ton bridge crane installed at the top of one of the transfer aisles. He confirmed it will be used to lift and rotate starships and boosters from horizontal to vertical once they arrive by barge from Starbase. Oh, and by the way, our very own Julia Bergeron spotted the 3 crane sections arriving at the Cape all the way back in May. She's also been posting lots of updates on construction from all around the Cape, from Giga Bay and recent work at Space Launch Complex 37. So give her a follow if you haven't already. And that's not the only Starship hardware Julia has been spotting lately. Just this past week, a launch mount section was staged just outside of the base, ready to be trucked in. It's likely headed to SpaceX's Roberts Road facility, where teams are assembling the first launch mount for Space Launch Complex 37. A barge also arrived this week, carrying the brand new deluge tanks and more launch mount hardware. Across the Banana River, Julia spotted yet another tower module stacked on top of Space Launch Complex 37A's launch tower. That's the 5th one so far. At this rate, the tower should be complete before not too long. But we need flight vehicles to be there first though, and hopefully we aren't too far out from the first being delivered. As you can see, SpaceX is full speed ahead with Starship's progress on all fronts, from future launch pads and gigabays to the very next Starship launch. Hopefully just a few days away now. But what are your thoughts in terms of how this flight will go? Full success? More issues on the boost back burn? Ship going all the way? Payload deploy, satellites making it where they have to go? Re-entry and splashdown? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, you can expect our usual pre-launch and launch coverage, our countdown to launch streams in the days leading up to flight, a stakeout stream in the morning of launch, and of course, a dedicated live launch coverage. I'm Max Evans for NSF. Thank you so much for watching, and we will hopefully see you after launch.